All right. Angie, hello.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Yay. And we can hear you. We can see you.
Good.
Everything is
I'm so
working.
glad. Woohoo! Here's a glass. I'm raising a glass
Cheers.
to you guys.
Cheers to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yep, absolutely.
I wanted to bring up one more operational point. I'm Laura, the other Silent Book Club co-founder. Hi. I will be mostly silent, per the name, on this, but I will be keeping an eye on the chat. If anyone has a question they want to ask, that's going to be my responsibility. So Angie and Guinevere can focus on the discussion at hand. So just add your question there. If you prefer it to be anonymous, feel free to just message me one-on-one, and I can share that question, and I'll make sure to make sure those get addressed as well. So that's my role here. Really looking forward to this.
So cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, everybody. This is great.
Yeah. So I wanted to just get things started. If you're here, I'm sure you all know Angie. She is the best-selling author of Miracle Creek. Miracle Creek is her first book, so she's a debut author, which I mean, like, I'm just so impressed that first of all, that anybody can write a whole book, but then the way that you are able to weave together so many voices and so many intricate plot points. Really, really just want to commend you on an amazing first effort.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's so awesome.
But we would love to start out, if you wouldn't mind, just reading us just a short passage from the beginning of the book.
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to. And here's the new paperback version that is just, I'm in love with it because it's just so beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to read, and let's hope, you know what? I'm just going to use my phone to actually shine a light on it so that I can actually see, because something weird has happened to my room light. All right. Sorry about the glare. The incident, Miracle Creek, Virginia, Tuesday, August 26, 2008. My husband asked me to lie. Not a big lie. He probably didn't even consider it a lie, and neither did I at first. It was such a small thing what he wanted. The police had just released the protesters, and while he stepped out to make sure they weren't coming back, I was to sit in his chair, cover for him, the way coworkers do as a matter of course, the way we ourselves used to at the grocery store, while I ate or he smoked. But as I took his seat, I bumped against the desk, and the certificate above it went slightly crooked, as if to remind me that this wasn't a regular business, that there was a reason he'd never left me in charge before. Pock reached over me to straighten the frame, his eyes on the English lettering. Pock U, Miracle Submarine, LLC, Certified Hyperbaric Technician. He said, I still on the certificate, as if talking to it, not to me. Everything's done. The patients are sealed in, the oxygen's on. You just have to sit here. He looked at me. That's it. I looked over the controls, the unfamiliar knobs and switches for the chamber we'd painted baby blue and placed in this barn just last month. What if the patients buzz me? I said. I'll say you'll be right back, but no, they can't know. If anyone asks, I'm here. I've been here the whole time. But if something goes wrong, and what could go wrong? Pock said, his voice forceful like a command. I'll be right back, and they won't buzz you. Nothing will happen. He walked away as if that was the end of the matter. But at the doorway, he looked back at me. Nothing will happen, he said again, softer. It sounded like a plea. As soon as the barn door banged shut, I wanted to scream that he was crazy to expect nothing to go wrong on this day of all days when so much had gone wrong. The protesters, their sabotage plan, the resulting power outage, the police. Did he think so much had already happened that nothing more could? But life doesn't work like that. Tragedies don't inoculate you against further tragedies, and misfortune doesn't get sprinkled out in fair proportions. Bad things get hurled at you in clumps and batches, unmanageable and messy. How could he not know that after everything we'd been through? Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I love that line that you leave us on, when you're talking about tragedies that don't inoculate you, and that, bad things come in clumps, and misfortune not sprinkled. And it's, obviously we are all living through a sort of like real time tragedy and misfortune, and that struck me so much when I was reading this about just how fast things can change, and how so many small details can just kind of have a domino effect and lead to something that on the one hand nobody could have anticipated, but on the other hand was a danger that that was spelled out, like, on the emergency sign.
Yeah, completely. And I took that a little bit from my life, because one of my kids, my oldest child, I have three boys, and one of them was born with deaf in one ear. And so we went through a lot of neurological tests and a lot of challenges and therapies and things like that. And then that same kid, when he was 4, was diagnosed with totally different um, uh, things, and ulcerative colitis and celiac disease. And I think that's where that idea comes from for me, the idea that when you go through something bad, especially with one person or one set of circumstances, you expect it to be over. You're like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to have a great rest of my life now. I've survived that. And then when something bad that's unrelated hits you again, then you start realizing it's sort of like the life's lessons. Wait, there is no fairness here. And so that's where it comes from. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what was so interesting about the book was that, I mean, I couldn't piece together, in advance how it was all going to come together. And, I mean, I think in a lot of mystery books, there's red herrings, and there's all of these tropes that come into play that sort of, send you down a path. And, and it's sort of a game to play when you're reading a mystery, to see if you can figure it out.
Right.
And so I'd love to hear, in terms of, as you were writing the book, and as you were trying to think about, how these things kind of all came together, and who the sort of whodunit factor, how did you sort of originally even map that out?
Yeah, and and one thing that we should say before we really get into the nitty-gritty is that I'm not sure if everybody has finished the book completely. So because of some of the spoiler effect, I am going to make sure to try to stay away from spoilers. And if there is a question about like sort of the ending or anything like that that necessitates that, we'll let you know, so that you can maybe turn off your speaker or whatever until we sort of like give you a big sign that you can safely turn it back on. But in any case, so having said that, it's so funny because this book is a whodunit, of sorts, because there is a big fire and explosion at the beginning of the novel that kills some people, 2 people, and injures a whole bunch of others. And there's a murder trial to figure out, who did it. So it is a whodunit, and you don't really find out. But to me, it was less of a whodunit and more of a howdunit and a whydunit from the very beginning. Because to me, even if I told you at the very beginning of the book who did it, I would hope that you would still sort of think, really, is that like, how is that possible, given some of the other things that I tell you very early on that don't seem consistent with who actually ends up having done it, or the group of people who end up having done it. So I do think it's that how and all the puzzle pieces coming together. And I have to tell you, I didn't know at the beginning of writing what who did it or how it happened or anything like that. I didn't know for a good year until I was done drafting, like through the first half of drafting the whole novel, who did it. And it wasn't until I was really done with the first draft that I was like, okay, now let's figure out if this actually makes sense and holds together. And, it was really through the revision process that it all came together. But it was almost like I needed to write and keep on writing and keep that motivation going because I didn't know who did it. And as basically a reader of my own book, I wanted to know. And so the only way I was going to find out was by actually writing, which is really hard for me and really slow going for me. And I kept on having to do it day after day.
That is amazing that that you went into it and you had to find that out for yourself as you were writing. I mean, it seems like such a daunting task to decide that you're going to kind of wade into something with, I mean, maybe I'm just a planner and like, I need to kind of, in sort of figure out or know where I'm supposed to be headed. But this kind of brings up a question that one of our readers asked. So this is Allison from Ventura, California, who wanted to know how you conducted research and how do you organize the research for your book, and sort of dovetail to that, what does your writing process look like? Now, I did read in an interview with your editor that you have a closet with Post-it notes all over it.
Yes, I do.
So tell us a little more about that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So research, I would say that living my life was basically the research for this particular book. And I think it's because it's my first book. And, people say for your first book, you put a lot of your own life into it. And that's definitely the case for me. For those of you who have read the book, there is a Korean immigrant family, the Yu family, and with a teenage daughter named Mary. And that's basically my life. Like, I am Mary. I am the girl who came over from Korea to the Baltimore area when I was 11. I lived with another family while my parents ran a grocery store in the middle of downtown Baltimore. That was a really dangerous part of Baltimore with thick bulletproof glass. My dad was actually shot once and the bullet grazed his neck. So they didn't want me anywhere near there. And so I ended up living with my aunts and uncle. And so I took a lot of that feeling of displacement, that feeling of almost being like abandoned by my parents, even though I now realize that was, they did it for me, but at the time, being a bratty preteen, I was definitely bratty about it. And so I took a lot of that and then put that in the book. I put my first career, which was as a trial lawyer. I put that in the book through the fun courtroom scenes. I hope they're fun for you. They were fun for me to write. I loved like all the, the sort of badass female lawyer, especially Shannon, who used all these charts and tried to trap witnesses and showing them up as liars and all of that sort of stuff. So that was really fun. And then the real bit of research is having lived through this whole hyperbaric oxygen therapy experience, or HBOT, which is in the novel. So the thing that explodes and catches fire in the beginning of my novel is this thing called the Miracle Submarine. It's like a little mini submarine that's an oxygen chamber that's for medical, experimental medical purposes. And I actually did that for my son for his ulcerative colitis when he was 4 years old. We went into this group chamber that is just like the Miracle Submarine that's in the book. And we went in and we sat with other families, 3 other families, and we did 40 dives, these hour-long sessions. So in a lot of ways, my research was just going through that experience for that whole time and talking to the other parents about what their lives were like, what it's like to have a child on the autism spectrum or with cerebral palsy or with Lyme disease, all the various conditions that everybody had, and just sort of living sort of with them and going through that experience that whole time. And so that was my process, was that I had lived it, and then I wasn't a writer when I was going through this experience, but later when I became a writer, I immediately thought of this setting once I decided that I wanted to work on a novel.
Okay, Angie,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask, when you were sitting in the chamber and, you know, you're in there for an hour and like, were you worried about it exploding and catching fire? Did you know about the risks?
Totally. So our HBOT operator was hyper vigilant. He was like so safety conscious, which was really, reassuring in some ways, but also like made you worry in some other ways, because he gave you all cotton clothing, and he said you cannot have on like any metal, so no jewelry. You have to take off your wedding ring. You have to take off like all of your socks and shoes. You have to have all cotton underwear. You can't have underwear wire bras even. And so you're thinking like, and certainly no electronics or anything flammable like paper or anything like that. So on the one hand, you're like, oh, this is great that he's be so safety conscious. On the other hand, you're like, okay, if it is so dangerous that I can't even wear like polyester socks, that seems really not good. So yeah, and we were he was so safety conscious that we were reassured, and I felt confident that we would be okay, and we were. But it is one of these things that I just had nightmares throughout it, and certainly like that's what, that was the first image, the image of fire and a boy with autism who is pounding his head against the steel wall of the submarine trying to get out because he is so anxious. That is the image that I had when I started the first scene of my novel. So, yeah.
Oh, I mean, I just am getting like claustrophobic just imagining it.
I know. I get claustrophobic just thinking back to it. It's ridiculous. It's really, because it's very dark. It has that confessional feel. And so as a result, though, you have this intimacy with the other parent, with the other, caregivers who are in there, the other parents. And so it really encourages like a confessional, where you are really talking about giving each other your life stories and comparing and contrasting. And it's all of these things and the shameful thoughts that you have, about your kids and your life, those all come out in the open. And I took a lot of that with me and put it into the novel. And somebody was asking about the process question. So when I started writing, for the first 6 months or so, I did nothing but just write in freehand, like, just handwritten in horrible handwriting that I could never even hope to decipher now. Just almost like diary, like first person format narratives from the various characters, just trying to get to know them. So for 6 months, nothing but that, just getting to know the characters. And then when I started writing, I'm one of these writers. I write very slowly and I just write scene by scene. And I have to be happy with the first line before I can write the rest of the paragraph. And I have to be happy with the first paragraph before I can write the rest of the scene. So it might take me like, I don't know, like a whole day to come up with the first sentence of a new chapter or a new scene. But then it might take me like an hour to write the last 2 pages of a chapter. So I just really need to figure out what's happening in that scene and what's important about it and what's the image and what's the rhythm that's important to that scene before I can go on, if that makes sense.
I'm guessing that there are probably a lot of writers in the room right now who are feeling heartened by your confession that it could take you a day to write the first line. It certainly makes me feel better, and I don't write novels. So, but this makes me think of, and there was also a question, this is from Asia from Los Angeles, and also a little bit of Marie from Cameron, Texas. I hope you guys are able to be here right now. But Asia writes, how did you decide to write the book? And Marie is, what was your inspiration to write the book? And to build on that, so I don't know how many of you know, but Angie went to Harvard Law School, I think, and then became a lawyer, was a trial lawyer. And I think that you mentioned to me that this is your fifth career. You had 4 careers before becoming a writer. Yeah. So what was it that really kind of made you decide that this was your path and that you wanted to become a lawyer?
Yeah, sure. So I think I became a lawyer because I thought of practicing trial law like you see on TV or in movies. I am actually an actor by training. So I went to a school called Interlochen Arts Academy in Michigan, if anybody has heard of that. I see Amanda Webb like laughing. And so so like for 5 hours a day, I did like improv and, breathing on a stage, and things like that. And I think and this was in high school, and my acting coach said, and I'm 50, so actually I just turned 51 last week. So
happy birthday.
Thank you. So this was a long time ago, and she said, and I think she was right. She said, realistically speaking, you're Asian. You're probably not gonna. It's really hard. It's hard to be in theater as an Asian actor. There just aren't the roles, and I think that's right. And Amanda Webb says she grew up in Traverse City, which is okay, great, awesome. I wanted to do something that was related to sort of performing, and that's what I loved. And I just thought, okay, well, maybe I'll be a trial lawyer, because to me that was like performing. You're in court and you're just talking to people and you're being dramatic and things. And so that's sort of the idea that I had of what it's like to be a lawyer. The reality is completely different. Like, you're in court maybe 5% of the time, and I did love being in court, but I hated everything else about it. I despised it. So it was really hard, and I decided almost right away this was not for me. So I did get some great courtroom experience and love that, but I, in my late 20s, decided to leave the law. I became a management consultant. I went into business at a place called McKinsey. And then I left that to start my own .com with some of my friends from McKinsey. And then I was a full-time stay-at-home mom because we were about to IPO with my .com, but then the whole crash happened in 2001. And so I had my first baby the month that we ended up selling my company to a public company. So I thought, okay, this is like the universe telling me that I should just stay home and just relax and, de-stress with a newborn.
Sorry.
right. No, it's so ridiculous. And then I had three boys, all of whom had, medical issues. And I went through all of that, sort of those types of challenges. And I was so upset about one day about just all the medical challenges that I was going through with all 3 of them. And I started sort of writing just to sort of let all of that out. And something about which I had never really done before. I'd never really done sort of creative personal writing. I'd only done like academic writing or legal writing or business. And something about that process was just so freeing to me. And I just loved it. And even just like trying to figure out how I felt so that I could put it down on paper was just so interesting to me and challenging. So it was like intellectually challenging, but at the same time, it was like emotionally fulfilling and satisfying. And it was all, and then, and one of these writers, Dorothy Parker, said this: I hate writing, I love having written. And so I loved having, I do hate writing, I still hate it, but I love having written. And I feel this sense of, oh, I just felt like, okay, this is what I have been waiting for and looking for and searching for my entire life, like going through career by career, job after job. Like, this is what I wanted to find, was something that I just loved the process of, and something that I actually was proud of myself for, and that I felt fulfillment. So yeah, so that's how I basically decided to be a writer and started writing. And I started with like short stories and essays and got them published in literary magazines that you've never heard of. And then I sort of worked my way up, and then it felt like, okay, I'm ready to tackle a novel. And that's what happened.
So clearly you are an underachiever. And um, okay, so I was going to ask you about your sort of your publishing journey. So you mentioned, starting out with short stories. So was Miracle Creek the first like full draft of a novel that you attempted? And did you know sort of when you decided to become a writer that this was the story that you needed to tell?
Yeah, it's definitely the first novel I've ever even attempted to write. So not only is it the first like full novel, but it's the first novel I've even started to write. So definitely yes on that. And then as far as, is this what I knew? Yeah, as soon as I decided that I wanted to write a novel, I knew that I wanted to, well, at first I thought there were two different novels in me. I thought, I want to write this novel called The Silent Grocer, about a Korean man, sort of like Park Yu in the novel, who is very unsure of his voice, and the English language and all of that sort of stuff. And I wanted to have that be sort of modeled after my dad. And so I knew that there was that story. And then the other story that I wanted to explore was this HBOT. And I thought I would do the HBOT story first, and then I would do The Silent Grocer as my second novel or something. And a friend of mine, I was sitting in the cafe of Politics and Prose, which is my indie store that's nearest to me that I love in DC. And a friend of mine who was in my writing group said, why don't you just combine them? Why don't you have The Silent Grocer be not a grocer, but like just, the owner of this weird thing, this HBOT thing that you're describing? And I was like, oh, wait, I would mix and match both of those, like both the special needs parenting and this, like, immigration. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, what, that makes sense, because what I'm exploring in both of those novels, that in my head at that time, is this idea of sort of extreme parenting and sacrifices that you make in parenting, and what that does to your psyche, and and all of these shameful thoughts that you have as a parent that you think you can never say out loud because it sounds too awful and upsetting, and it makes you out to be a bad person. Those types of things, and the myth of the good mother and the good father, the capital M, capital F, And I just thought, okay, maybe I explore that in one novel together. And if I can pull it off, and that was the big if, was I didn't know if I could pull it off, but I wanted to try because the idea was too tempting not to, and sort of juxtaposing those two situations next to each other seemed so interesting to me.
Well, I think you pulled it off. I wanted to, yeah, it's so fascinating. I wanted to bring in one of the questions from someone else who's here, Andrea Rothenberg, and I think you've touched on this a few times, and she comments that autism is extremely difficult for many to understand and deal with. How do you think the emphasis on autism spectrum disorders will affect parents who have kids with autism when they read the book?
I love that question so much because so many of my really dear friends from the HBOT world have kids with autism. And so they were in many ways my first readers for Miracle Creek. And it's just brought us really close together because I feel like in order to write this book, I really had to sort of put myself in lots of different parents' shoes and try to see what they might be feeling that, when I maybe said something insensitive or vice versa. And one thing that I love is that there are, if you go on Goodreads, there are this is like a whole community that I never knew about, but apparently on Goodreads, there are these like super reviewers who have like so many followers, and they really influence other people, other readers and stuff like that. Anyway, so two of my first Goodreads reviews from these super reviewers were from two people who are also bookstagrammers, and one of them is on the autism spectrum herself, and another one is actually turns out she lives 10 minutes from me, so we've actually met for coffee and drinks and things like that. But the other one is the mother of a child with autism, and I was super sensitive to this issue, and I was worried about what the reception would be like in that community. And both of them, who were very, very early reviewers, way before it was published, were so encouraging about it. And a lot of the parents of children with autism in particular have told me in book clubs and in comments and reviews that it makes them feel less alone, because they sort of recognize what these moms are thinking and feeling, the characters in the novel, and that they feel heard, and they feel like they're not monsters for feeling and thinking some of the things that are shameful that they have had, tiny little moments thinking and feeling. And so that made me feel just so, it made me feel like I had done something that I am happy about and proud of. And the other thing that Emily May, who is the person who says in her comments that she, has autism, has said is that it's made her understand her parents more, which I think is a really interesting perspective also. So I've heard that also, and I've also heard that from more younger people who have read my book, who are maybe like second or third generation of immigrants, who have said this helps me to understand my parents or my grandparents better, why they think the way they do, speak the way they do, whatever. And so those are the kinds of things that are just so gratifying as an author, to hear. So so thank you for asking that, because I think that's something that I was really worried about, and I really have tried to work on with, my friends who have gone through that same thing. And I feel like I've gotten really good feedback on how it's actually played out.
So, this touches on what has become kind of a controversial topic, in the current moment. And I don't know how many of the people on the chat here are familiar with American Dirt and the controversy around that. Certainly, if you are in our Silent Book Club Facebook group, you probably have come across a heated debate because there are many. But this was a question from Amy in Baldwin, New York. And, and Angie and I actually talked about this before the chat. But it's a really interesting question. So I think I'd love to hear your take on it. But Amy wrote, being a writer of fiction, did the American Dirt controversy make you nervous? And what does this mean to you for the future of fiction?
So to me, I don't think that it changes anything that I would do myself. Because, okay, so just to step back on the American Dirt controversy, I am one of the authors that signed the letter to Oprah Winfrey that asked her to reconsider. And the reason that I signed that is I did read, I have the book. It's actually in this room, and so I am one of these people that likes to actually read stuff before I criticize it or whatever. But I thought that it's a thriller that is based on an interesting and very high drama place and situation. And I think the problem that I perceived anyway is not that the author, who hasn't had real personal experience, would write about that, because I think that's something, like there's The Martian, right? Where somebody who hasn't gone to Mars has written about that. So, we as fiction writers obviously take situations that we're not familiar with personally, and we research and we do the things. And I think the problem was that made me uncomfortable with it personally was the fact that it was sort of presented as canon. And I think that if you're going to present something as sort of the book to read on this experience, then and the situation that you're talking about is something that is as politically charged as this, then you do need to make sure that you have personal experience. And also, I think I think I just had a bad visceral first reaction to it, because the letter that was written in the beginning of the galley just presented the author as somebody who is the wife of an undocumented immigrant, which made me just assume that she had family members who had gone through similar situations as in the American Dirt context, and that wasn't the case at all, because her husband is actually an undocumented immigrant from Ireland, which I think is very different from being an undocumented immigrant from Latin America or Mexico or anything like that. So those were the kinds of things that really sort of gnawed at me. And I think as a fiction writer, we just need to make sure that we write the stories that we write in as authentic a way as possible, and that we run them by the people who have experienced these things, to make sure that that level of authenticity is there. And that's something that I am definitely going to continue to do with my fiction, for sure, and I would have done even without this controversy having taken place. And then once that's done, especially if it's not something based on something that I myself have gone through, to make sure that it's not marketed in that way, and that it's marketed in an authentic way. And it would have been fine to say, hey, this is a really fun thriller about something that is in the author's imagination, but don't marketed as, oh, this is something that the author has personal experience with, because that's really,
Yeah.
problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of the, what when it triggered sort of this kind of like, I think one of the good things that came out of it is that it really publicized this own voices movement, and the fact that there are so many writers out there who are writing about experiences that should be heard and that need to be shared, and that there is such a limited market in publishing for elevating those voices. And in terms of my own perspective, I think that I think that really sort of at the crux of the matter was the fact that that this was the title that the publisher really threw all of their marketing behind, when there are so many other excellent books about similar topics. And I am thrilled that Miracle Creek has gotten such great publicity and such wide distribution. First of all, because it's just a great book, but it also does really touch on the experience of an immigrant family in America, and what that means, and also the experience of people who are people who have disabilities, or parents who are raising children who have differences. And and I think that those are stories that are incredibly important that we share, and that are important that the people who have the power to elevate those stories and to distribute those stories should be doing so. So thank you for writing it and for sharing it. I want to be mindful. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, the one thing that I will say is there have been a couple of, not too many, but especially from, I think, people with autism, because my book does depict some of the difficulties and challenges of parenting children with disabilities, medical issues, and special needs. There have been I've gotten a couple of comments on Goodreads. There are like 10,000 or something, but still I try to read as many of them as I can. And there are some that have said, hey, we haven't heard from the characters who actually have these disabilities. And that was because for this book anyway, I thought of this as really tackling the parenting, the really thinking through what are the parents thinking, and the people who want to become parents, because there is a character there are two characters who want to who are doing this medical treatment for infertility issues. And so those are the ones that I focused on, but my next novel will be focusing on the children, one of whom has a disability. So I will be exploring different angles from that. But these types of critiques, I think, come from lots of different places, and they're from really good places. And I did read some of those comments and sort of think, I wish I had the room to write a novel, but it would have been 500 pages long, and I did need to sort of, focus in on one theme for this particular novel. But I'm glad that I have lots of other books to sort of look forward to.
Yeah, I think we'll all be looking forward to hearing more about that.
Oh, good.
There was sort of another question, sort of related, I think, to the publishing experience. And let me actually make sure I get it correct. But Anna Callis mentioned that she saw a copy of The Ark and it had a different title, the advanced reader copy. And she asked why the title changed.
Oh, okay. Wait, hold on one second. I'm gonna get something. Oh, this is so fun.
I hope we get to see all of the titles.
Oh my God, I love her so much, you guys.
Oh, look at it. There it is.
And this was the first proposed cover.
Ooh, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. So anyway, so it just reminded me, my little writing note is right next to me. So it was called Miracle Submarine, which I still think of it almost as Miracle Submarine, because Miracle Submarine is the name of the chamber, and I feel like that is almost like a character in and of itself. Um, and so that was the name, that was the title of the book, when I sent it to my agent and got my agent and all of that sort of stuff. And the problem was that some of the booksellers said Miracle Submarine, the name submarine, like it just makes it sound like it's sci-fi or maybe like a military thriller. And I said, okay, the military is not gonna name their submarine the Miracle Submarine. And I think that you can tell from the cover that it's not like a sci-fi or military thriller, but but they sort of brought up a really good point, which is that when a reader hears about it, are they going to think, ugh, submarines? They're like, I don't want to read about a submarine. And then they have to like take the time to sort of read about what this submarine is and realize that it's not really a submarine. And so we decided to name it after the town, which is Miracle Creek, which I was fine with, especially since one of the books that really influenced my writing of this a lot is Dennis Lehane's Mystic River. And so Mystic River, Miracle Creek, I sort of thought that's sort of a nice titular homage. So I thought, okay, all right, I'm fine with going with Miracle Creek, but my editor and I always joke that we sort of think of it as, Miracle Submarine still, that it was based on booksellers' objections. And so the advanced reader copies, the galleys, I think they printed like 5,000 and sent them all out, and they all said Miracle Submarine. So we were like, what are we gonna do? And they had like these cool stickers that you put on, so that when you put the sticker over it, it actually looked like it was originally like that. So it turned out to be okay, but it was the source of a lot of stress. This is like the kind of stuff that you think about when you're publishing, I guess.
Okay, so speaking of publishing, we have time for one last question. And Scarlett from Fairfax, Virginia wants to know, what are you writing next?
Okay, so I am writing a novel called Happiness Quotient. And it's about a 10-year-old boy who is nonverbal with autism and apraxia and things like that. And he goes on a walk around Fairfax, actually. I'm near you. I am in Fairfax County in Northern Virginia. And he goes on a walk at the beginning of the novel with his father, who's his primary caregiver. And only the boy returns home. And because he's nonverbal, he can't tell the authorities or his family what happened on that walk with his dad. And his siblings, who are fraternal twins, around 17, 18, one boy, one girl, they become obsessed with using the new assistive communication devices and technologies and therapies to help him to find his voice, so that they can try to figure out what happened to the dad.
Wow. Okay, that's already like has me at the edge of my seat. So
Good. I'm glad. I'm so glad. That's great. I'm so happy.
Well, we wanted to, one last thing sort of before we go. If for those of you, or if anybody, and you know what, I will stop the recording now. Well, first of all, let me thank you, Angie, for taking the time to speak with us and join us. This was so fun. And I also really want to thank everybody who, has navigated this strange new world to join us on Zoom for a not at all silent book club, because we've been talking the whole time. So
I know.
If you need to, put yourself in a quiet room and read quietly for the next hour, please do so. I think I will. But what
And
we'd
also,
like, oh, go ahead.
can I ask, and you guys can raise your hands, or Guinevere or Laura, you can at least tell me. As the Silent Book Club, do you guys know of the book Quiet by Susan Cain?
Oh yeah.
And do you guys all love it, right?
Raise your hand if you're an introvert.
And love the book Quiet.
Yay. And love the book Quiet. Yes.
So she's one of my really close friends from law school.
No kidding.
And in fact, when she was in DC for her paperback tour, when Quiet first came out, I was her moderator. And
amazing.
yeah, and I'm actually a total extrovert. And so we talked a lot about the whole introvert versus extrovert thing on stage, which was really, really fun.
Oh my gosh.
But I feel like I'm becoming more of an introvert as I get older, because I just crave the quiet and just reading time and reading space.
Yeah. So one of Laura and my sort of like one of our sort of like peak Silent Book Club moments was when Susan tweeted about the Silent Book Club. It was after an NPR article came out, and we actually quote her tweet on our website because it was such a moment of recognition that that the introvert revolution is. And honestly, I mean, the as far as pandemics go, like, we have a toolkit for you. Come to us. We can help.
Definitely. I'm going to have to text her now after I get off.
Oh, thank you. That would be wonderful. Okay, so before we go, I'm going to stop recording the video here for those of you who are shy. But we would like you, if you have a copy of the book nearby, to hold it up to your camera, and we're just going to take a screenshot